Paraic here, gardener. I just finished with Pat and we were talking about autumn and autumn colour, and the weather at the moment is absolutely perfect. Today is beautiful for getting back out into the garden. So we were chatting about some of the autumn plants, and I was mentioning some of the trees in particular, and this is a lovely variety of sorbus or mountain ash with brilliant autumn colour. So it's got these lovely yellow berries at this time of year, but the leaf changes from green to a brilliant red as we slip through autumn, as we go into October and November. And that can be planted in your garden now. It's great for wildlife because the bees love the plant in the springtime when it comes into flower, and then the berries are ate by the blackbirds later on as we go through winter. So that's quite a nice tree to plant. Another variety of sorbus, this is one called November Pink. And as you can see, very similar to the Joseph Rock, except you've got lovely pink berries, again, right through October, November, December sort of period. So there are two really nice trees you could plant now for berrying colour. I was also telling Pat about the Malus family. So these are the crabapple family. So again, this is a variety called Golden Hornet. And the apples are actually edible on the plant. Again, it flowers in the springtime, brilliant for the bees. And it produces these lovely yellow fruits. They're actually apples, and a brilliant plant to plant in your garden if you want to pollinate your apple trees. So if you're not getting as many apples on your apple trees, then plant a couple of these malus close by and they'll help to cross-pollinate them, and they come in different colours. So here's another one called Everest, which has beautiful red berries. So they can be planted together. Very, very easy trees. And for foliage colour, this is one of the really nice cherries called Burgundy Red. It's got these lovely kind of burgundy wine foliage, pink flowers, double pink flowers in springtime. And again, those leaves go a lovely autumnal colour, really bright shades of orange and red. And one of my favourite autumn foliage trees is liquid amber. So this one, as the name suggests, it produces lovely amber foliage in the autumn winter period. It's green in summer. It's just beginning to change now, and it'll continue to hold its lovely autumnal colours for the next couple of weeks, for another kind of 6 weeks. We also chatted about planting bulbs in spring colour. I mentioned this one. This is the two-toned tulip. If there was any plant to plant at this time of year for spring colour, this is my favourite. It's one that gives you these lovely shades of pink and yellow. It's one called Whispering Dream, and very nice for cutting. And we also mentioned Pretty Woman, which is a red variety, and the black tulip. So this is the darkest, blackest tulip that I've come across, called Peter Shirer. It's a really nice variety, and again, lovely for cutting. And bulbs are so easy to grow. They're foolproof. If you plant them now, they're going to come into colour in spring and summer of next year. But now is the time to start planting bulbs in your garden. We're going to go to your questions.
Okay, so the first one is, can you recommend any indoor plants?
Okay, well, there's lots of great indoor plants. The trend at the moment is actually for more succulent cacti type plants because they're so easy to grow. You water them once a month and you repot them every 3 to 5 years. So how easy is that? So plants like mother-in-law's tongue, the money tree, the jade plant work really well. Many of the cacti plants worked brilliantly as well. But other easy to grow indoor plants are things like the peace lily, which produces lovely white flowers, dark green foliage, very, very easy to grow. You've got the umbrella tree, which makes a nice taller plant up to maybe 6 or 7 feet in height. You get those both in green and variegated form. So that's the umbrella tree, lovely indoor plant. Another easy one is called the yucca plant, which has bare stems and then green foliage on top, and again is a very simple plant to grow indoors. And remember, the plants indoors in your office or in your home environment excrete oxygen, so they actually purify the air. They take a lot of the metals and minerals from the air and filter those. They take in carbon dioxide that we breathe out and excrete oxygen, particularly at night time. So they're brilliant to have in around your home or office space, and now is a good time to introduce them into your indoors. So
Okay, so is it too late to plant autumnal plants?
No, you can plant. Autumn was traditionally the time for planting many plants. Trees, shrubs, hedging plants, fruiting plants, roses were always planted in the autumn. And I was chatting to Pat about the bulbs, planting bulbs now. If you have bulbs in your garden since last year, they're actually producing a lot of new roots at this time of year. So plants are actively rooting, even though the top portion of the plant is not growing. The roots are actively growing. So if you plant a tree in the autumn, in October, November, early December, it'll actually start to produce a lot of new roots over the winter period and be a stronger plant next spring. So my advice is always to plant in the autumn if you can. The weather conditions are ideal at the moment, and many of the plants that I showed here this morning, they're perfect for planting at this time of year.
Okay, so Hugh wants to know, what is the best daffodil variety to plant on a lawn?
Well, remember, Hugh, that the thing about the lawn is that you've got to, the daffodil, once it finishes flowering, it needs 6 weeks to die back before you can mow the grass. So you want to plant early flowering varieties and short-stemmed varieties as well. So the two that I would recommend, and the two I have in my own garden, one is called February Gold. It only grows about 8 inches in height. Beautiful, bright yellow flowers that flower in February, so February Gold. And if you plant it in clusters of maybe 7 or 9, they give that lovely clustered effect in the lawn. Because it flowers in February, when you go to mow the lawn in late March, early April, they've died back nicely at that time of year and you can cut your lawn as normal. The other variety I plant is one called Jetfire. Again, it's a short variety. It's an narcissi variety of daffodil, and it's got 2 colours in the flower. So it's got a lovely shade of orange in the centre hue and yellow on the outer edges, and quite short as well. So for me, February Gold and Jetfire are 2 of the best. There's also, you can plant things like crocuses, work really well in lawns because again they're flowering early in the season. Snowdrops work really well, and winter aconites work brilliantly in lawns as well because they're flowering in December. So plant early flowering bulbs, something that has finished flowering by kind of the end of February, early March. It's beginning to die back at that time of year, particularly in lawns. But many of the bulbs that I mentioned today can be planted certainly in borders and beds, under shrubs, and there's lots of really other good daffodils that you can plant in your borders.
Okay, so I'm moving into my first home this year and I've never had my own garden before. Do you have any tips on where to start in terms of decorating or things I should know?
Okay, well, first of all, when you're approaching a new garden or planning a new garden, I always say it's cheaper to plan on paper. So sit down, plan out the garden in terms of, trees that you're going to put in, where the hedges are going to go, where the lawn is going to go, where the patio is going to go. So plan it out on paper. It may take you 2 or 3 years to do everything, but at least you've got a sense of a plan. So always plan on paper. Your local garden centre is a great resource. If you bring in pictures, phone photographs into your local garden centre, they'll give you specific advice on the type of plants that will suit in your location and depending on the size of the garden as well. So always use your local garden centre because they've got qualified horticulturists there that know about the plants and can advise you. For new gardens, the basics you start on is creating privacy and shelter in the garden. So planting hedges where they need to go, because a hedge, for it to be any use in the garden, is going to take 6 or 8 years. By putting it in as a small plant, it needs 6 or 8 years before it's offering you any shelter or privacy. Trees are the next thing to plant, and generally in your local garden centre you'll buy the trees 6 feet, maybe 7 feet height. So they've got a nice bit of height, but again it's going to take them 5 or 6 years to establish themselves and make something that's going to stand out. So trees are the next thing to go in because they take quite a long time. Putting in your lawn is obviously needs to go in, and then your shrub borders are the last thing to go in, and you can simply, once your lawn is in, you can simply crank up your lawnmower and cut a nice edge to the bed and plant your shrubs and borders into that area. But my advice is really to plan it on paper, take some digital photographs of the area, bring it into your local garden centre and ask them for it'll be free advice they'll give you, and they'll be able to recommend a list of plants that would be suitable.
Okay, so this comes in from Katrina. So I have a wine-coloured calla lily bulb which I planted in a pot. Should I leave it in the pot or transfer it to a garden bed?
Well, you can do both, but it'll be perfectly happy in the pot. It's probably of one of the dwarf varieties of calla lily, and there's varieties like Nero that have that lovely dark coloured flower. So it's a perennial plant that comes back year after year. It is herbaceous, which means it will die back, particularly as we get into colder weather in November and December. Once we get a bit of frost, that calla lily will die and it'll look like it has disappeared, but it's there as a bulb and a root, and it'll re-emerge next spring again. So it'll be perfectly happy in the pot. My advice would actually to be plant, if you're leaving it in the pot, maybe change the compost right on the very top of it and plant some spring bulbs. Things like the snowdrops I mentioned, the Jetfire narcissi, Red Riding Hood tulips. Plant those for a bit of spring colour, and your calla lily then will re-emerge next April and May then come back into flower next June or July for you as well. Now they tend to get a little bit bigger over the years, so as it begins to fill out the pot, you could consider maybe in 2 years' time taking it out of the pot and plant it into the garden soil. And they also lend themselves to division. So as it gets a bit stronger, you'll be able to divide it up into 2 or 3 pieces and spread that out into your garden. So the choice is yours. You can leave it in the pot. My advice is to plant some spring bulbs so you've got some colour there in springtime, and then maybe in a year or two plant it out into your border soil.
Okay, so the last question is, I want to do my bit for the environment. So what are the best plants to go for with this in mind?
Okay, well, I'm actually giving a talk this Saturday, believe it or not, in Westport. And the topic of the talk, I'm actually talking to the Irish Bee Federation. They're having a bee festival. And I'm speaking about the plants that should be planted in the garden to attract bees. So, first of all, to attract any pollinators into the garden, you're looking for plants that have nice single flowers. So don't go for those fancy roses with big double flowers like peony roses or the big blousy roses, because they're useless for our bees and our pollinators and our butterflies. Some of the trees I mentioned, this sorbus is absolutely brilliant. The bees love it. Holly is really good. Anything in the malus family, these guys here are absolutely, they have been pollinated by our honeybee. So anything that berries, bees absolutely love because they'll pollinate the flowers in the springtime. Many of the bulbs that I mentioned are brilliant as well. So the crocus, the winter aconites, and the single flowering things like Chinodoxia, snowdrops are absolutely brilliant. So single flowering bulbs are brilliant for bees, and it'll generally tell you on the pack. If you look at the pack, it'll actually recommend them for bees. There's a whole range of flowers that you can sow from seed at this time of year. So things like Phacelia, bees absolutely love, and it can be sown from seed. It's a beautiful blue flower. Flowers from April right through to the end of the summer, and that's fantastic for bees as well. So drop into your local garden centre. There's lots of seeds you can plant. There's lots of bulbs you can plant for bees. There's also lots of trees and shrubs that are absolutely perfect. And anything fruiting like blueberries, blackcurrants, strawberries, raspberries, bees absolutely love those as well. So my advice, if you're not in Westport this Saturday to catch me for the honey talk, then my advice is to drop into your local garden centre, speak to them about bee-friendly plants, as a whole range, and try to get plants that flower at different times of the year. So don't have everything flowering in June. Have plants that flower in January, February, some that flower in March and April, June and July, and so on, right through. Bees are still active at this time of year. They're feeding on our ivy of all things. So they're actually taking the ivy flowers and nectar at this time of year. They'll also love heathers. So heathers in your garden will attract bees and pollinators into the garden. And there's a lovely shrub called the butterfly shrub, which, as you can imagine, attracts the butterflies and the bees into the garden. It's a plant called Buddleia. It flowers all summer long, and it's so easy to grow. So there's lots of plants that you can use. Bye for now. I'll be back in 2 weeks' time to do it all again.